Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of 10 Minute Marvel. I'm your host, Petter. Today on 10 Minute Marvel, we're going to be talking about She-Hulk episode 6. We are getting close to the end here. But before I do all that, we have a little bit of news to talk about. So thank you so much for listening. I hope that you're enjoying this podcast. If you are, please consider subscribing, sharing it with your friends, or leaving a rating and review. You can find the podcast over on iTunes, Google Podcast, Stitcher, and Spotify. So in the news, the Fantastic Four film, which got its director officially announced at D23, also now has two writers for it, Jeff Kaplan and Ian Springer. I'm not familiar with any of their work, but they have worked together before on shows and on writing, so it makes sense to get the pair of them, from what I can tell. But that's really it for news. It's a very light news week. The next closest thing is Kevin Feige was talking about not recasting T'Challa and kind of why they didn't do that. It's mainly that the timeline of this film coming out in comparison to Chadwick Boseman's passing, it didn't feel right. It didn't feel like it was the right time to kind of swap that out, which I think makes sense. Well, I tend to think that Chadwick Boseman was very good in the role. I do think there are other actors who could do very well as T'Challa, as the Black Panther, but with the timing of this film coming out so shortly after Chadwick Boseman's passing, that it didn't make sense, especially when filming it and especially when working on it, that they would have even considered that. And I think that's very much the right thing to do in that situation. If eventually there's like another T'Challa from a multiverse or something like that, which I kind of doubt that they'd even do, it should be done respectfully, obviously, and then a few years down the road, not anything too soon. But with that, let's talk about the latest episode of She-Hulk and about the wedding that, well, pretended like it was mainly filler. So when I talk about that, I mean that it pretended like it was going to be something that just wasn't convenient for us. It was going to be a silly little episode in between everything. In fact, they kind of even call that out at the very beginning, where Jen talks to the camera about how weddings are never at a convenient time, making reference that, yeah, in real life, oftentimes you just have to kind of drop what you do, or it takes up a weekend, takes up some time, Thursday in this case, that messes with your plans. That weddings happen on other people's schedules, not yours. For the audience watching that, it's about the fact that we saw Daredevil, we saw the helmet, the mask, and we fully kind of were thinking, okay, we're going to get this. But then we didn't. No Daredevil in this episode at all. They got out in front of that with that line by She-Hulk to basically be like, yeah, we know what you want, and it isn't going to be happening this episode. But I think they did that in a clever way, and I think there might have been some thoughts that, okay, this isn't going to be that important an episode then. But I'd say it was one of probably the slightly more important episodes that we've had to this point, because we started to finally get some answers. And it leaves us with a whole lot more questions, like the intelligentsia, which, besides being a 4chan-esque website that is just full of really lousy people doing really lousy things and saying really lousy things, that there's something behind it. And it's something that, I think it makes sense. It's this idea, and especially just in the time that we live in the time that this show is being set, you can crowdsource a lot of ideas. And so the intelligentsia, whoever that might be, there are some ideas for that. We'll talk about them coming up here shortly, that maybe what's happening is kind of that crowdsourcing. It's letting the really lousy people out there, the ones who want to be hateful, want to be crappy, they can then spout their ideas somewhere. And the people who actually are smart enough to be able to do something with it, they're going to be able to take those ideas and work them into a bigger plan, which is really screwed up. But, I think there are people probably in the real world who do some of that anyways, which is hopefully they're doing it and crowdsourcing for things that are good versus what the Intelligentsia website is being set up as. And then, of course, there's the subplot with Mallory and Nikki and Mr. Immortal, who is an actual comic book character, who is immortal, can't die. And that was a fun thing. That was kind of our courtroom type thing, super powered, starting to get introduced to more and more and more superheroes. And of course, obviously at the wedding, we had the fight between Jen/She-Hulk and Titania, and it was what I would call a really fun episode overall, and I think one that had more story implications. And let's talk a little bit about the Intelligentsia, because they are something in the comic. They're a group, not like the website that we saw, where these people, they're kind of the brains, smart kind of organization, your AIM type of organization. And, well, obviously they're not a group of good guys. So who might be on there? The first idea kind of that has been tossed around a number of different places is that it's going to be someone like the Leader, because the Leader is going to be showing up in Captain America: New World Order. I could see that. I'm not convinced just because they did that big announcement. Why wouldn't you want that reveal to be done in the show first, and then maybe even have a post-credit slide that basically says, and the Leader will be back in Captain America: New World Order. So I tend to think that it could be him, but it's a little bit odd to spoil that reveal. The other one that makes some sense is the person who was kind of creepy about stuff on the dates before, Todd. So Todd, who, like I think I mentioned before, had a credit of Hulk Todd on one of the earlier screener releases. It could be that, well, he's the brains behind this operation. He's the one who's looking to become a Hulk of some sort, because it seems unlikely that we wouldn't have, somebody turn into a Hulk for Jen to fight and to get more of that Hulk versus Hulk action. And he would fit the bill if they wanted to, say, turn him into Red Hulk or something like that. Especially with William Hurt having passed away as well, so Thunderbolt Ross being out of the picture, that now maybe they could be working with a different actor instead. But that's just kind of some early thoughts. Obviously, there's other characters as well who are part of the Intelligentsia, one of them being MODOK, and we know we're getting MODOK in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania. Who knows, maybe it's something where MODOK is created in this. I could see that, but let me know your thoughts. Who do you think is behind the Intelligentsia? How much of a part do you think they'll play in the rest of this? And we're 2/3 of the way through now of She-Hulk. How are you liking the show, and what do we kind of expect for the end? Like I said, my big expectation is we're going to have a Hulk versus Hulk fight. But leave your thoughts about that over on Twitter. Tweet them to me at @thescando or with hashtag 10minmarvel, or leave comments over on nerdologists.com. Again, thank you so much for listening. I hope that you're enjoying the podcast. I gave a few ways that you can help support the podcast at the beginning, but we also have a Patreon, patreon.com/nerdologists. The funds there go to help improve the quality of this podcast, as well as the Malts and Meeples YouTube channel. But with that, I'll see you next time.